Have you ever been told that saving 3 to 6 months of expenses is all you need for an emergency fund? Well, what if that advice is no longer enough? In fact, for a lot of people in 2026, what they think is a solid financial safety net is actually little more than a comforting illusion. The moment a serious problem shows up, that carefully saved emergency fund can disappear much faster than expected. The reality is simple: the world changed, but the financial playbook didn't. Millions of people still believe they're financially prepared because they're following advice that worked years ago. Meanwhile, emergencies have become more expensive, more frequent, and far more complicated than the situations that old recommendations were built around. I'm Della, and over the last few years I've watched countless people get caught off guard by emergencies that their fully funded emergency savings couldn't handle. If you believe your emergency fund has you covered, or if you're curious why the traditional advice may be dangerously outdated, make sure you're subscribed and hit the like button if this video helps you think differently about your finances. Let's start with the advice everyone still repeats. Save 3 to 6 months of living expenses in a high-yield savings account and you'll be protected. Back in 2012, that recommendation made a lot of sense. In 2026, it's becoming increasingly disconnected from reality. Why? Because emergencies today don't look like they did a decade ago. The cost of unexpected events has skyrocketed. Recovery takes longer. And people are facing multiple financial setbacks at the same time instead of one isolated problem. Yet people continue following outdated guidelines and calling it responsible financial planning. Let me show you exactly why the traditional emergency fund may be far too small by looking at what actually happens when real-world emergencies collide with real people. Meet Brandon. He's 31 years old, earns about $78,000 per year, and followed every piece of traditional financial advice perfectly. His monthly expenses average around $4,300. Based on that, he built an emergency fund worth roughly $26,000, about 6 months of expenses. He felt confident, more prepared than most people he knew. He believed he had finally reached financial security. Then everything changed. A slowdown in his industry led to widespread layoffs. One morning he joined a company meeting and discovered his entire division was being eliminated. At first, Brandon wasn't panicking. After all, he had done everything right. He had a fully funded emergency account. He figured 6 months would be plenty of time to land another position. But reality had other plans. During the first month, he filed for unemployment benefits and immediately started applying for jobs. The unemployment checks provided approximately $2,000 per month. Unfortunately, his normal expenses were still about $4,300 monthly. That meant he had to withdraw roughly $2,300 from savings. Emergency fund balance, $23,700. Month 2 wasn't any better. The job market was crowded. Hundreds of professionals in his field had been laid off around the same time, and everyone was chasing the same openings. One promising opportunity required him to travel to another state for a final interview. Flights, hotel costs, transportation, and meals totaled nearly $900. He spent the money because the opportunity seemed worth it. He didn't get the job. After covering both his regular expenses and interview costs, his emergency fund dropped again. New balance, $20,500. Then came month 3. His SUV suddenly developed a major transmission issue. The repair bill came to $3,200. Sure, there were cheaper temporary fixes available. But Brandon knew that once he found employment again, he needed dependable transportation. Between the repair costs and his normal monthly spending, nearly $5,500 disappeared from his emergency fund. Balance remaining, $15,000. Month 4 finally brought some good news. A company offered him a position. The salary was slightly lower than his previous job, around $73,000 annually, but he was ready to move forward. There was just one catch. The position required relocating to another city. And moving isn't cheap. Security deposits, first month's rent, moving services, travel expenses, utility setup fees, furniture and household costs. By the time everything was added together, Brandon needed nearly $6,800 just to start over. His emergency fund plunged to roughly $8,200 before he'd even received his first paycheck. And because several costs arrived at the same time, part of the move had to be placed on a credit card. Think about that. He started with what most financial experts would call an excellent emergency fund. Yet a layoff, a vehicle repair, and relocation expenses consumed the majority of it in just a few months. No major medical emergency. No legal issues. No family crisis. No unexpected disaster. Just a job loss, a broken vehicle, and the cost of getting back to work. Now he's beginning a new chapter, carrying credit card debt and a severely weakened financial cushion. In many ways, he's more vulnerable financially than he was before the emergency started. And that's exactly the problem. Modern emergencies don't arrive one at a time anymore. They stack together. One setback creates another. Then another. And suddenly your carefully planned 6-month emergency fund is disappearing much faster than you ever imagined. The traditional advice was created for a world where emergencies were isolated events. You lost your job. Or your car broke down. Or you received an unexpected medical bill. One issue. One solution. One recovery period. That's not how life works anymore. Today's emergencies are interconnected. A layoff creates transportation costs. Transportation problems affect job searches. Job searches create relocation expenses. Relocation creates housing costs. Every problem triggers another problem. And that's why more and more people are discovering that what used to be considered a safe emergency fund is no longer providing the protection they expected. Now let's talk about the real reason emergency funds seem to disappear so quickly today. The cost of emergencies has exploded. A decade ago, many financial surprises were painful but manageable. Today, a single unexpected expense can wipe out a huge portion of your savings almost overnight. Take vehicle repairs. What used to be an $800 repair can now easily become a $2,500 or even $3,000 bill. Modern vehicles aren't just machines anymore. They're packed with sensors, computers, cameras, and specialized systems that require expensive diagnostics and highly trained technicians. Even simple repairs often involve software updates and proprietary parts. Healthcare costs tell a similar story. Even people with insurance aren't fully protected. A surprise trip to the emergency room can still leave you with thousands of dollars in deductibles, copays, and out-of-pocket expenses. It's not unusual for a single medical event to cost between $4,000 and $7,000 even after insurance contributes. Then there are dental emergencies. A cracked tooth. An infected root. A crown replacement. One unexpected dental issue can easily cost several $1,000s before it's fully resolved. Homeowners face even larger risks. A furnace replacement might cost $10,000. A new roof could run anywhere from $18,000 to $35,000 depending on location and materials. Water damage, electrical problems, foundation issues, none of these come with small price tags. The traditional emergency fund model was designed around a completely different environment. It assumed most emergencies would cost maybe $1,000 or $2,000. Expensive enough to hurt, but not enough to devastate a properly funded savings account. That assumption simply doesn't match reality anymore. Today, one major emergency can erase 25% or even 40% of a 6-month emergency fund. And if 2 emergencies happen close together, which is far more common than people realize, you can find yourself running out of cash despite doing exactly what the financial experts recommended. There's another major flaw in the old advice. It assumes your expenses remain stable during an emergency. But that's rarely what happens. Most emergency fund calculations are based on your normal monthly spending. The problem is that emergencies create entirely new expenses that weren't part of your regular budget. When Brandon lost his job, his costs didn't magically shrink. In many ways, they increased. He spent more money driving to interviews. More money updating certifications. More money networking. More money applying for opportunities. More money solving problems created by the emergency itself. And that's what catches people off guard. Emergencies don't just replace income. They create additional spending. A budget that normally requires $4,300 per month can suddenly require $5,500 or $6,000 per month once the crisis begins. The emergency itself becomes expensive. The recovery becomes expensive. And every extra dollar accelerates the drain on your savings. That's why Brandon's 6-month emergency fund didn't actually provide 6 months of protection. His calculations were based on normal life. The moment life stopped being normal, the math changed completely. But there's an even bigger issue that most people don't fully appreciate. Finding a new job takes dramatically longer than it used to. The old emergency fund advice was built around the assumption that someone could lose a job and reasonably expect to find another one within 3 to 6 months. Years ago, that wasn't a bad assumption. In today's economy, it's often unrealistic. Professional job searches regularly stretch between 5 and 9 months. Sometimes longer. Especially if you're in a specialized field. Especially if your industry is going through layoffs. Especially if hundreds or thousands of people are competing for the same opportunities. This changes everything. Think about what that means. If the average recovery period now approaches 6 months or more, then a 6-month emergency fund is no longer providing a comfortable margin of safety. It's barely covering the expected timeline. And that's assuming everything goes perfectly. Imagine exhausting your savings right at the moment you're finally receiving an offer. You secure a position in month 6. But onboarding takes several weeks. Your first paycheck doesn't arrive until month 7. Suddenly you're forced to borrow money simply to survive the final stretch. That's becoming increasingly common. People aren't running out of money because they're irresponsible. They're running out of money because the assumptions behind traditional financial advice no longer match modern reality. But there's another hidden threat quietly reducing the effectiveness of every emergency fund. Inflation. Most people understand inflation affects groceries, housing, and everyday purchases. What many don't realize is that inflation is constantly attacking their emergency fund too. The money sits safely in a savings account. It earns interest. Everything appears fine. But purchasing power tells a different story. Let's say your savings account earns around 4%. Sounds pretty good. But if the real cost of necessities is increasing by 5% or 6% annually, you're still losing ground. Your money is growing slower than the cost of the emergencies it's supposed to protect you from. That means every year your emergency fund becomes slightly weaker without you noticing. Imagine someone saved $25,000 for emergencies. 2 years later, that same $25,000 might only provide the equivalent purchasing power of roughly $23,000 when measured against actual emergency expenses. The number in the account hasn't changed, the effectiveness has. And that's one reason so many people feel like their emergency fund is never enough. They hit the target. They celebrate. Then years later they discover the target moved. Vehicle repairs cost more. Medical bills cost more. Housing costs more. Relocation costs more. Everything became more expensive while the emergency fund remained largely unchanged. The savings account balance stayed the same. The size of the emergencies didn't. And that's why a number that once looked safe on paper can suddenly feel dangerously small when real life puts it to the test. So if the traditional recommendation isn't enough anymore, what should an emergency fund actually look like in 2026? For most households, the answer isn't 3 months. It's not even 6 months. A far more realistic starting point is 12 months of expenses. That might sound excessive at first. But once you look at how modern emergencies actually unfold, it starts making a lot more sense. A full year of expenses gives you something the old advice often doesn't: breathing room. It accounts for longer job searches. It provides protection against multiple emergencies happening back to back. It creates a cushion against inflation, slowly reducing the purchasing power of your savings. Most importantly, it gives you time to make decisions instead of forcing you into desperate ones. But even 12 months isn't necessarily enough for everyone. Some people face risks that require an even larger safety net. If your industry experiences frequent layoffs, your risk is higher. If your income changes dramatically from month to month, your risk is higher. If children or other dependents rely on your paycheck, your risk is higher. If you own a house, your risk is definitely higher. And if ongoing health concerns could unexpectedly create medical expenses, your risk increases again. The reality is that emergency funds should be built around actual risk exposure, not generic rules that apply equally to everyone. Let's look at another example. Meet Ryan. He's 35 years old and earns roughly $90,000 annually. His household expenses average about $5,200 per month. Following traditional advice, he saved around $31,000 as his emergency fund. Most financial experts would have called that responsible. Maybe even impressive. Then life delivered a situation he never planned for. His wife experienced complications during pregnancy. What was supposed to be a normal final trimester suddenly became a high-risk situation requiring extended medical supervision and strict bed rest. As a result, she had to stop working much earlier than expected. The household instantly lost a major source of income. Then came additional expenses. Insurance helped, but medical bills still piled up. Specialized treatments, extra appointments, medications, and testing resulted in nearly $10,000 of out-of-pocket costs. Preparing for the baby became more expensive too. Unexpected equipment, supplies, and medical necessities added another $4,000. Because Ryan was juggling work, household responsibilities, and caregiving duties, they also needed outside help for chores and daily tasks. That cost another $3,000 over several months. To support his family, Ryan eventually reduced his own working hours. The lost income added up to nearly $5,000. Meanwhile, regular life didn't stop. Rent still had to be paid. Utilities still arrived. Food costs continued. Insurance premiums remained due. Their normal monthly expenses of roughly $5,200 kept flowing out month after month. Over a 5-month period, that's another $26,000. Now add everything together. Medical expenses, $10,000. Baby-related costs, $4,000. Household assistance, $3,000. Lost income, $5,000. Regular living expenses, $26,000. Total impact, approximately $48,000. Ryan's $31,000 emergency fund disappeared much faster than expected. And despite doing exactly what traditional financial advice suggested, his family still accumulated debt before the situation stabilized. This is the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. The old emergency fund model isn't completely wrong. It's simply incomplete. It assumes emergencies happen individually. Real life rarely works that way. Emergencies tend to create chain reactions. One problem leads to another. The second problem creates a third. And suddenly you're facing a financial situation that looks nothing like the neat examples found in personal finance textbooks. That's why emergency planning today requires a different mindset. You aren't preparing for one isolated event. You're preparing for a sequence of events. A layoff that leads to relocation. A health issue that leads to lost income. A family emergency that creates travel expenses and missed work. The crisis itself is only part of the financial damage. The ripple effects often cost just as much. And that's something many emergency fund calculations completely ignore. Think about Brandon from earlier. When he lost his job, he didn't just need money for rent and groceries. He needed money to solve the actual problem. He needed transportation for interviews. He needed travel expenses. He needed relocation money. He needed resources that would help him recover from the emergency. The same thing happened to Ryan. His family didn't just need money to survive. They needed money to address the complications creating the crisis in the first place. This distinction matters. An emergency fund performs two separate jobs simultaneously. First, it replaces income. Second, it finances the solution. Traditional calculations usually focus almost entirely on the first responsibility. But the second responsibility can be equally expensive or sometimes even more expensive. That's why so many people reach their savings goal and still find themselves financially overwhelmed during a real crisis. The emergency fund was designed to cover daily life. The emergency itself wasn't fully included in the equation. And in today's world, fixing the emergency often costs far more than simply maintaining your normal lifestyle. That's one of the biggest reasons why larger emergency funds are becoming less of a luxury and more of a necessity. The risks are bigger. The costs are higher. The recovery periods are longer. And the old formulas simply weren't designed for the realities people are facing today. Now let's talk about the group of people for whom traditional emergency fund advice is even more dangerous: self-employed workers, freelancers, contractors, and small business owners. If that's you, the standard 3 to 6 month recommendation probably isn't just inadequate, it may be setting you up for serious financial stress. Why? Because people with traditional jobs at least have some built-in protections. They may qualify for unemployment benefits. They typically know when their paycheck arrives. Their income is generally predictable. Self-employed individuals don't have those advantages. When business slows down, there's no unemployment check coming. When a major client leaves, nobody replaces that income. When you're unable to work, revenue often stops immediately. For business owners and freelancers, emergencies aren't limited to personal crises. Business disruptions are emergencies too. A major client cancels a contract. Demand for your services suddenly falls. New competitors enter the market. Equipment breaks. Economic conditions change. These situations are incredibly common, yet most traditional emergency fund advice barely accounts for them. Meet Ethan. He's a freelance marketing consultant earning approximately $95,000 per year. For years he followed the standard financial guidance and built what he believed was an excellent emergency fund. He saved nearly $40,000. More than 6 months of expenses. He felt prepared. Then 2 of his largest clients unexpectedly ended their contracts within weeks of each other. Neither termination was related to performance. Both companies were cutting budgets and reducing outside spending. Unfortunately, those 2 clients represented more than half of Ethan's income. Almost overnight, his monthly earnings dropped from roughly $8,000 to just over $3,000. His monthly expenses, however, remained close to $5,800. Now he faced a growing gap every month. Finding replacement clients wasn't instant. It required networking, advertising, business development, proposal writing, sales calls, and time. Lots of time. For nearly 6 months he struggled to rebuild his client base. By the time revenue recovered, more than $30,000 had disappeared from his emergency fund. And here's the important part. Nothing unusual happened. This wasn't a once-in-a-lifetime disaster. This was a completely normal risk associated with self-employment. That's why business owners often need significantly larger emergency reserves than salaried employees. They're exposed to both personal and business-related financial shocks. Now let's address the biggest criticism people make whenever larger emergency funds are discussed. Opportunity cost. You've probably heard this argument before. Why keep tens of thousands of dollars sitting in a savings account earning a modest return when that same money could be invested and potentially earning far more? It's a fair question. Let's say you keep $70,000 in cash reserves earning around 4%. Meanwhile, a diversified investment portfolio might average 8% to 10% over long periods. The difference can be substantial. Over many years, that's real money. But here's what many people misunderstand. Emergency funds and investments have completely different jobs. Investments are designed to build wealth. Emergency funds are designed to protect wealth. Those are not the same objective. You don't invest emergency savings because emergencies rarely wait for favorable market conditions. Imagine losing your job during a major market downturn. If your emergency fund is invested, you may be forced to sell assets precisely when their value has fallen. That's a terrible position to be in. People who build long-term financial security understand that growth and protection must work together. One without the other creates problems. Too much money sitting idle can slow wealth creation. Too little emergency savings can destroy years of financial progress with a single crisis. The goal isn't choosing one side. The goal is balance. If your entire net worth is sitting in cash, you're probably being overly cautious. But if nearly all your wealth is invested and you have very little emergency protection, you're taking risks many people underestimate. The healthiest financial plans usually include both substantial investments and substantial reserves. So how should people think about emergency funds today? Here's a practical framework. Start with 12 months of essential expenses. Treat that as your baseline. Not your ideal target. Your minimum target. Then begin adjusting upward based on your personal risk factors. Work in an industry known for layoffs? Add several more months. Own a home? Add more. Support children or family members? Add more. Have recurring health concerns? Add more. Earn a regular income? Add more. Self-employed? Add even more. If you're the only source of income for your household, increase the target further. Using this approach, many households will discover they need somewhere between 18 and 24 months of expenses available. That sounds extreme until you compare it to the financial risks people actually face. The purpose isn't to be pessimistic. The purpose is to be realistic. Real emergencies don't care what financial rule became popular on social media. They don't care what worked 20 years ago. They care about today's costs, today's risks, and today's recovery timelines. And all 3 have changed dramatically. Eventually, Brandon recovered. He paid off the debt he accumulated during his relocation. He rebuilt his savings. But this time he didn't stop at the traditional target. Today he earns more than he did before and maintains a much larger emergency reserve. Some people tell him he's too conservative. He sees it differently. He's experienced firsthand what happens when your safety net isn't actually large enough to protect you. That's why this conversation feels especially important right now. The economic environment has become increasingly unpredictable. Entire industries are changing rapidly. Technology is transforming jobs faster than ever. Healthcare expenses continue rising. Housing costs remain elevated. Natural disasters are becoming more frequent and more expensive. Financial shocks are no longer rare exceptions. For many people, they're becoming a normal part of life. The emergency fund advice created 10 or 15 years ago was designed for a more stable environment. We simply don't live in that environment anymore. The risks are larger. The costs are larger. And recovery often takes much longer. That means your emergency fund should reflect today's reality, not yesterday's. So here's the takeaway. Stop assuming 3 to 6 months automatically equals safety. Calculate what 12 months of expenses would actually look like for your household. Evaluate your risk factors honestly. Create a target based on your real circumstances rather than generic rules. Then work steadily toward that number. Will it take time? Absolutely. Will it require sacrifices? Probably. Will some of that money earn less than it would in investments? Yes. But genuine financial security has always required trade-offs. Your emergency fund isn't too small because you failed. It may be too small because you followed guidance that hasn't kept up with the world around us. Most people won't adjust their strategy. They'll continue relying on outdated targets because larger numbers feel uncomfortable. Unfortunately, many of them won't realize the weakness in their plan until a crisis exposes it. You don't have to make that mistake. You can build a stronger safety net before you need it. Because the worst possible time to discover your emergency fund isn't big enough is the moment you're depending on it to save you. By then, the lesson has already become expensive.